All right, hey everybody, we're back, and it's time to continue our discussion of public opinion and citizens' attitudes by asking a really important question, a question that I think really undergirds a lot of people's assumptions about politics in today's day and age, and that is, do people actually know enough to do democracy? And so we've actually thought about this question before. If you go back to the content modules with Robert Dahl, we read that Robert Dahl wrote that enlightened understanding is one of those key principles of democracy, that we need to ensure that Americans or anyone living in a democracy are able to understand enough about their political system and about the sort of actors in that system to be able to make good judgments at the polling place in order for democracy to flourish. And of course, without enlightened understanding, if we were to shut down people's ability to obtain knowledge about the candidates and about the issues and about the institutions that populate our political world, we would face this principal agent problem, ultimately, between voters and politicians. Right? The principal agent problem being, critically, right, we are the principal, right? We, the people, are the individuals who are collectively delegating a task, that is, governing, to agents who we could call our members of Congress or the president or anybody else who we elect to elected positions. And the principal agent problem, as we talked about way back in chapter 1, way back in the first module, occurs when we're unable to understand what it is that the agent is doing on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of like paying somebody in your neighborhood to mow your lawn for 6 months while you go out of the country on some kind of safari or vacation or archaeological dig or something. And you come back and the lawn is horrible and it's 7 feet tall and you've been fined by the city. You realize, hey, I should have probably found some way to check in on this person who was supposed to mow my lawn, because it turns out they didn't. That's a principal agent problem. We lack enough information about the agent's performance to be able to critically evaluate whether the agent's doing a good job, and we won't be able to sanction the agent or pursue some alternative arrangement, right? So without enlightened understanding, we might result in bad agents, right? Bad actors who are not governing with the people's interests in mind. So the question that we need to go back to is, do people know enough to be able to overcome this terrible principal agent problem that might result in poor governance? And of course, if we go back to the 1960s and further, all the way to today, we've measured civic competence, or we've measured people's knowledge about political institutions and actors and policies. And those first survey researchers in the early 60s, with their bow ties and their horn-rimmed glasses, extremely 60s kind of vibe, these researchers were stunned. They were shocked when they conducted these scientific surveys, and for the first time got really accurate results about what the average American really knows about politics. And it turns out the results showed that Americans really didn't know very much at all about political actors, political institutions, or public policies. And in fact, the biggest shock to that system was that we made the assumption as political scientists in the 1950s that a lot of people had what we might call constraint in their opinions, ideological constraint. And so we were really, really, really stunned to discover that ideological constraint seems not to exist. So what is that constraint concept? Well, let's talk about it for a moment. Initially, we were under the impression that people had these well-organized belief systems. And so actually going back to that original literature, one of the big ways of describing these belief systems was to think about the concept of religion. All right, so if you have some kind of religious identification, let's say that you identify as a Methodist or a Presbyterian or a Southern Baptist, right, or somebody who practices Reformed Judaism or something, right? Whatever that label is that you have, that means that as a result, you probably have some set of kind of doctrinal assumptions that you're making and things that you believe, right? So say that if you're, somebody, say that you're a Presbyterian, you might have different opinions about whether or not, for example, a woman is allowed to be, a priest, than if you were in some sort of conservative sect like the Southern Baptist Church that might say, no, you can't let a woman be, in a position of leadership in a church. And so that's obviously a huge distinction. And so If somebody belonged to the other church and had the opposite perception, we would be surprised, perhaps, because we would think that that person would not be very happy, right, in that church that falls on the other side of that very important and controversial sort of issue in religious doctrine. And so the same thing goes for politics, right? If you call yourself conservative, that would mean that you're probably conservative on a number of different issues. You're conservative on the issue of, guns. You're conservative on the issue of reproductive rights. Conservative on the issue of, foreign policy. Conservative on all sorts of different issues. A, B, C, D, E, all these issues. If we were to ask you a whole litany of different issues on a survey, that you would keep checking the conservative option if you said you were conservative. But in fact, what we discovered was that people were all over the place, right? It wasn't just A, B, C, D, E, conservative, conservative, conservative. People were liberal on some issues, conservative on some issues, moderate on other issues. Their responses didn't fit neatly into a single belief system. And so again, you should ask yourself, what the heck could this possibly mean? What does it mean that people are all over the map, are all shuffled and unsorted in terms of their opinions? Well, there's kind of two possible thoughts that we might roll with for now, right? One is that people are simply too dumb to get it, to understand how these different issues fit together, and understand that one party espouses one set of issues and the other party generally espouses the other set of issues. Or, right, if you think about it, maybe you are also somebody who fits into this category, somebody who is too smart to fit into this single set of conservative or liberal issue positions. Right? Don't put me in a box, you might say. I might believe one thing about one issue, but I've studied this other issue very carefully, and I've come to believe something different than what one party or the other tells me about these important topics for the country. And so it might be that people have just never thought about politics before, and so they have a set of issue positions that they've adopted on the basis of just like randomly stumbling around the world of politics, or they've considered those issues with great care, and they've actually come to adopt a set of positions that are really, really clearly thought out, but don't fit into one label. And so, of course, as it turns out, there are both types of people in the electorate. There's people who are simply have not really thought about these issues at all, and there are people who have thought so much about those issues that they eschew a liberal or conservative kind of patent definition. And of course, right, this is the next thing I want to address, is that this is a gross, I think, misstatement. Right, to say that people are too dumb, right? I don't actually think that that's the case at all. I think that probably you've heard that somewhere before, right? Somebody on Facebook, some uncle has probably told you, people are too dumb to participate in American politics. They're too dumb. They shouldn't vote, right? Nobody should vote except for me because I'm the smart one. We've probably heard somebody say something like this at some point in our lives. Maybe you also think that. I'm going to try to dissuade you from that perception maybe today. I think this is a gross simplification. It is not the case that people are too dumb to understand the world of politics. I think it's actually that they don't care, or that they don't have a good reason to care. Okay? People are capable of understanding political life. It doesn't take that much knowledge to be able to establish for yourself a set of preferences that are going to reflect your vested interests in the world. And so really, this is a topic that scholars have studied over time. It's something that we might call rational ignorance. And some scholars, I think, would argue quite forcefully that this is the case. The definition of rational ignorance is that most Americans are going to benefit little as individuals from learning about politics, and therefore they're not going to, expend the energy required to do it, simply because there's not a lot of benefit to it. Right? It's a classic rational choice problem. It's a collective action problem. The individual incentives, the individual benefits of getting knowledge are low, right? Like, what do you gain if you become really knowledgeable about politics besides the ability to annoy your family at Thanksgiving, right? Not much. Are you going to individually overturn the entire political system and get everybody to think, differently about politics? Probably not. But if we all did it together, would we live in a different country? Like, absolutely, right? A fully informed electorate would be an incredibly powerful and incredibly, different electorate entirely, because they would be able to oversee their agents and the principal agent problem, right? Those politicians in a much more meaningful and trenchant way than what we have now, which is maybe a more cursory kind of oversight. And so this collective action problem of rational ignorance is not something we can blame on any one individual person, right? Those costs to learning about politics are high. And of course, the greatest sort of example of that is this class, right? I'm fully aware that you all have a lot on your plates right now, and you have a tremendous amount to do. And as it turns out, sometimes you might make the judgment call that you're going to not study civics as much as, say, physics, right, on any given week. You've got other stuff going on. Now apply that kind of logic to the person who is struggling to pay their mortgage, who's got 2 jobs, who's got several kids to feed. You're not going to sit down for an hour every night and read the Federalist Papers, right? It's just not going to happen. You've got bigger fish to fry. And so this rational ignorance phenomenon, I think, again, it's not something we can blame on anybody. It's not that Americans are dumb, right? It's that there's a lot of pressures in their lives. And again, the individual benefit to becoming fully politically informed is quite low relative to the potential benefits that we might gain if everyone were to do it collectively. So it's a classic collective action problem. And so maybe there's a solution here. Maybe we should, force people to learn stuff about civics. We should force them to watch the Bill Becomes a Law video until they can, hear it in their sleep. We should get them to remember the branches of government, and we should get them to memorize the names of all the Supreme Court justices and develop little songs and mnemonics to remember the presidents. Okay, that could be helpful, right? We might be able to increase people's knowledge of who's responsible for what, which I think, of course, is a pretty important topic. But I want to show you something here, an image that is, I think, quite poignant. What the heck is this? Well, many of you who are in the know that this is the very exciting game of cricket. And cricket is, of course, played on a pitch. And here we have the bowler who hurls this ball towards the batsman. He's trying to knock these wickets here as the batsman is trying to hit the ball and score overs. It's a really, really complicated game, and one that I think an American audience, unless you've got some experience with this, maybe you come from a country where cricket is super popular, right, like India or Pakistan or some other places in the world, England obviously being another place where cricket is very popular. My father actually is English, but he's not a cricket fan at all. But really, I bring this up not to talk about cricket, but to ask a set of questions, which is, what the heck is going on in this picture? Right? What is this? What the heck is this, right? Who is winning? Who's on which team even, right? What's the objective here? And this image, I think, is sort of the perfect allegory for what the world of politics, right? What the front page of a newspaper might look like to somebody who is struggling from rational ignorance. If somebody had not taken the time or energy to learn about the basic rules of the game in the world of politics, this is probably what politics looks like, right? Here's the president hurling this thing at Congress, and Congress is trying to do something, and then you've got these guys over here. I don't know who they are. There's the Supreme Court. No one really understands what this is, right? Who's winning? What's the score, right? And then what about these players, right? Who's your favorite player of all these people? Right? Can you name one? No, of course not, right? Oh yeah, not to mention the fact that all their uniforms look exactly the same. It's impossible to tell who's who. And so, who are these players? What teams do they play for, right? If an NBA game was entirely just random college walk-on players, would it sell tickets, right? No, another part of this is that we look to visible figureheads to be able to inject some excitement into a sport like this. And of course, knowing the players also helps us identify who the good guys are, because we might see a player and say, oh, I know this person, I know what they're like, and I really like them. Or I might say, oh, that player, I don't really like them, I know some things about their personal life, and it turns out that they're not a very nice person and we shouldn't support them. All of these questions and more, again, if we're in this context, we can't answer. And so again, right, scholars will sometimes argue that we're actually doing as much as we can in high school settings to teach students the rules of the game. But another layer to this is actually that it may be that politics today is actually quite different than the way that we teach those rules. We might teach, for example, if you've ever been to a hockey game, for example, maybe you've gone down the road, you've gone to a Washington Capitals game, or you've gone to a Philadelphia Flyers game, and you maybe have never been to a game before, and you're going to go. Maybe in this case, you've actually gotten a chance to go attend a sport in real life again, which would be kind of interesting. But in this alternative universe, you're going to go to a hockey game for the first time, and you're like, okay, I'm really excited about this. I've read the rule book of hockey, and I know that you've got these 5 players on one side and 5 players on the other side, and these goalies who wear these pads, and you've got this stick and the puck, and you know all of the blue line rules and icing and all these really esoteric rules about how hockey's supposed to work. And of course, you get down to the Capitals game, and maybe they've got a game against the Carolina Hurricanes or somebody, and they've got really bad blood. And they, like the previous game, like a whole bunch of really, really like bad stuff happened, and they really got into it. And so these two teams have no interest in playing the game as it's supposed to be played at the beginning of the game. The whistle blows, and they all just drop their gloves, and they all just start punching each other, right? And you might say something that probably would resound in the minds of a lot of potential voters today in American politics. This is anarchy. I can't watch this. They're not even trying to score. They're just trying to punch each other. They're just trying to inflict damage on the other team, right? This is, I think, an important aspect to this rational ignorance issue. And in fact, very recently, a recent book that's been published in political science is, I think, making this case even more forcefully in the 2020 context, is that essentially in America, we've kind of got two groups. And it's not Republicans and Democrats. It's actually people who are extremely turned off by the world of politics. And that may be you even. I may be even talking to one right now. You might say to yourself, politics is nasty, politics is divisive, politics is ugly, and I don't want to think about it. Other people might say, I watch political content 10 hours a day. I'm constantly scrolling my Twitter feed. I've got 17 different cable news channels, roaring in the background. I cannot get enough political content. Right? I'm a political junkie. And so essentially, because of the fact that we've got this very divisive politics and rational ignorance is at play, there's a new polarization in American politics that's becoming increasingly extreme, where some people know a tremendous amount about politics and follow it like it's the most exciting sport in the world, and many other people are completely tuned out. And so if you imagine Dahl, right, as kind of a representative of somebody who's a concerned, democracy advocate, you might look at the situation and say, that's not great. Right? We said that everyone should have enlightened understanding in a society to be able to effectively participate, right? So this might be a problem. But, other scholars might come back and say, well, this could be okay. Maybe citizens could just do enough with this limited knowledge, even the ones that are fairly tuned out, to contribute even just a little bit to democracy. And so this is a topic that we want to pick up next time when we think about the study of voting behavior, because the same sort of question holds for this topic, which is the question of, is it enough to be able to cast a ballot that's relatively uninformed, right? Are there certain things that you can know, very basic things that will allow you to nevertheless cast a ballot that is good enough to be able to participate effectively in democracy? Or do we need to know a tremendous amount about politics, about the rules of the game, and about the policies that, for example, the incumbent administration has passed in order to effectively cast a good or an enlightened ballot? So again, very different assumptions about sort of elitist visions of democracy versus more populist visions of democracy that we need to think about in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you in the next one.